Good evening. The Committee of the Whole is still in recess pending establishment of a quorum. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called to order. We have, in my hand, I have amendments, 4 in a row for Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, you have, it's under SB 55 TCN L1 to 14 P83R. This has to do with Custom and Quarantine Agency. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, Can you tell me what my amendment is again? Okay, thank you. All right.
All right, there you go.
Okay. All right, thank you. Oh, okay. This is an amendment to lines 1 through 14, page 83. And this is an increase to the general fund appropriation, and then also, colleagues, the $700,000 increase to the Customs and Quarantine Agency inspection fee fund that we did earlier in the budget. And what this $3 million is going to, in a future amendment, is to fund the retroactive hazardous pay from 2017. So I humbly ask your support.
Does any of my colleagues would like to speak to this amendment? I see no hands. Yes, Madam Speaker. It's the one with P18, page 80, correction. Page 83.
Lines 1 through 14, page 83. It should say line or L 1 through 14.
You also have a follow-up, which would be for line 19, line 9. You have 2. Madam Speaker, would you like to comment on this one?
I just wanted to ask OFB if they could explain, so the current budget bill gives $3 million more in the general fund than was given to them in 2021, and it gives $2 million less in the inspection services fund, but it looks like it gives an overall almost $1 million increase from FY21 already. Is that right? Used to be 11,441. This bill says 12,292.
Yes, Senator. What the amendment proposes to do is to increase.
No, I'm asking about I'm asking about how you came up with the increases to the budget bill from FY21. The general fund is increased by $3 million to customs, and then you took the special fund, the inspection services fund, down $2 million. I guess if you could start with that, just tell us how this $2 million was reduced or why, and how you increased the general fund $3 million. What was that going to cover?
Okay. Yes. If you look at the FY22 budget, it shows a total amount of $10.254 for $383 from the general fund, and a total amount of $2.038473 in the special fund, for a total of $12.229856. The reason why there's a difference, basically of $851,200 $45 is that the custom and quarantine fund is not performing and hasn't been performing for the last year or so. So instead of, I believe, the amount that we were estimating for customs, I believe in 21, I believe was $4 million, but right now it's tracking, almost barely tracking $1 million. So we were anticipating, at least, again, this was, a month and a half ago, we were anticipating that with the opening, hoping with the arrivals of tourism coming in, we were just hoping that, and taking the numbers that GVB was estimating, anywhere from 70 to 130,000 tourist arrivals, that at least it would pick up at least 50% from where it was today. So if we're collecting, roughly, I think right now we're tracking, let me see. Yeah. We're tracking only $875,000 in the custom and quarantine fund. So we're being a little bit optimistic here simply because of the numbers posed by GVB, and we were kind of like, using those same numbers projecting for the TAF. I thought it would be something that it can achieve at least a $2 million mark by next year, considering all things were going to improve. So the $4 million that we were estimating FY21, again, is only tracking 800 some thousand. So we, estimated maybe half of that at 2 million. And we subsidized custom and quarantine from the general fund with at least $2 million again, just to get them to the level of what they're having this year. And we were told that there's also a $734,000 increase in their rent. So that kind of almost ate up most of the increase that we gave them, just to get them to the level where they were in 21. So all we did was just subsidize the custom and quarantine fund by about $2 million from the general fund, just to get them to the FY21 level, which is already bare bones operation for them.
So you're telling me that we increased customs budget from FY21, even though we're decreasing what we think they're going to be able to get through their own special fund, but we're giving them more money from the general fund to pay rent up at the airport? Almost $1 million, $800,000, $700,000 you said for rent alone increase?
Senator, what we did is we budgeted all the warm bodies and all the regular operational costs.
Yes.
And there is an increase in their operational rent for $734,000. So, I don't know what the situation is up at the airport with the rent with the airport, but that is the amount they indicated to us that they needed.
Yes, they've been giving rent breaks to other tenants at the airport. They're also proposing in the latest meeting with the Chamber of Commerce to give airline fee breaks to the airlines. I'm talking about the airport here. And I don't agree that we should fund an increase. They've cut down their space up at the airport, and I don't agree that we should allow the airport to charge them more, $700,000, almost $1 million more for customs. This money should be used for other very needed services by customs, like dogs, as opposed to rent. Is there a current obligation to pay? Is it hazardous pay? Is that what was explained? Well, it's not here. Increase the customs?
If you give me a second, I'll check whether or not we budgeted for hazardous pay for FY22, if that's your question. Okay, Speaker, the total amount we budgeted in the FY22 budget for hazardous pay is approximately 650,000 for 22.
Okay, so you budgeted for it, meaning you recognize that that's an obligation of the government?
No, what it is, it's part of their staffing pattern, which indicated was part of their bottom line salary requirement, which we did budget for.
All right, how are you increasing the Customs, Agriculture and Quarantine Inspection Services Fund, the special fund? Or maybe the author could use, how is this fund being increased here? Did we increase this in the revenue section of the bill? They're going to bring this in,
Yes, it did, in the revenue section.
and this comes through passenger fees?
Passenger fee and cargo.
Okay, because you had decreased it from 4 million to 2 million, but now we're going to increase it again based on the same exact visitor projections?
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Yes, Senator Nelson, point of information.
We only increased it once, and that was in the beginning of the chapter. We only increased it once, which was in the beginning of the chapter, and you have to account for what you increase. And if we wanted to fund something, you explained to us in the rules of engagement that you would have to find the funding source. And so in
Okay.
the beginning of the chapter, when we had the panel here, we were talking about the possibilities of the increase and would it be reasonable to increase the CQA fee by 700,000. And Gary Hiles projected that tourism was going up, and then Steve was amenable to say that this is a positive outlook for the 700,000.
All right, and that's where it was increased in chapter 1. In other words, that's what you're saying. Okay, Steve, maybe you may want to comment to that's when it was increased.
Yes, if the body recalls, when we were back in Chapter 1, before we actually bookmarked Chapter 1, I think that there was an amendment proposed to increase the Custom and Quarantine Fund by 700,000, which was approved and passed. So I believe what the proposal is doing is just allocating that increase in the Custom and Quarantine Fund.
I can see that. My question was, you had represented to us that the 4 million that we've budgeted for FY21 was 2 million too high. And so you reduced it by 2 million, and now we're increasing it by 700. But, and that you've already budgeted for FY22 hazardous pay in the 10 million from the general fund and all of it. But that you're trying to cover by these increases, $700-some thousand increased airport fee. Yeah, I just can't make sense of that. I don't see why we're gonna put our precious money that we're taking away from refunds to pay for the airport's rental. And I think that should be decreased by that amount, that 700 increased rental. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator, Madam Speaker. Does anyone else like to speak to the amendment? Well, stand by, folks.
Point of
Colleagues.
inquiry, Mr. Chair, was that an objection to the amendment?
I beg your pardon? I could barely hear you.
A point of inquiry, was that an objection to the amendment?
No, I'm suggesting that we decrease this by whatever amount he said was, that Customs is going to pay more to the airport in these kind of times. $700,000. This doesn't make any sense. After they've come in here and told us all their efforts of how they've tried to decrease rent, they've lowered down their space requirements, and we've seen the airport give rental breaks to all, some of its tenants, and Customs was not able to negotiate that. It doesn't make sense.
I think then maybe the question should be, I can understand where you come from, but that's in the operation side. But I saw hands go up there, Senator Shelton and Senator Brown. So Senator Shelton, you had a comment on the amendment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do have a question for OFB regarding funding to Customs and Quarantine for rent at the airport. We know that customs isn't going anywhere. We need them at the airport. The airport recently refinanced bonds. I want to know if we choose tonight not to fund the rent for CQA, what are we jeopardizing?
Point of order, Mr. Chair, point of information. It's an increase in rent, not their regular rent that they described to us when we were refinancing those bonds. It's an increase by $700,000.
Understood. I understood your statement, Speaker, but I'd rather turn to the OFB to identify what was the rent previously and if there was an adjustment, and that's what he declared as 700,000. Because I don't think that was a complete answer from the OFB. Maybe the OFB can clarify that. If you can probably identify what was the rent in 2020 and 2021, that's in the budget, and and what is it going to be on 22, and then we'll know exactly what the the complete answer is.
Give me a second, I'll give you the amount that was budgeted in FY21, but I do know historically, the total rent cost is 2.8 million. And according to Custom and Quarantine, they've always been underfunded the last couple of years. So I believe this year they're trying to get up to the 2.8 million to be appropriated outright for rent rather than being incorporated part of their operational budget. But I'll get you the amount what was appropriated for rent in 21.
With that note, we'll take a short recess while he gets that. All right, here we go. Committee of the Whole, back to order.
Okay. Based on the expenditures and the FY22 budget, in FY 2020, total rent cost was $2,697,647. In FY 21, what was budgeted for rent was $397,733. In 22, we are budgeting $233. So I think the last couple of years, we've been giving them a lump sum budget, hoping that they would at least find sufficient funds within that cap to pay for the expenses. But now they're telling us that, the rent is already up to 2.3 a year. It's getting kind of difficult trying to extract that from the lump sum budget, especially when we've been streamlining the budget last year, cutting down, vacancies. There's no option anymore for them to utilize any type of lapses. So now they're asking us outright, can we at least provide the funding for rent specifically, which has been underfunded the last couple of years. So thus the increase of the $734,000.
All right, that's the answer. Senator Shelton, you still had the floor. Was there something you were asking? Or was that the question you were asking? Are you satisfied? All right, and I think the next hand was Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The more I hear about this, the more questions that I have, because we did attend the hearing with regards to Customs budget, and that's when they informed us that they had not been paying their rent and that they did not have enough money in their budget to buy fuel for their vehicles. That's a substantial increase if that's indeed the case with the Guam Airport Authority. And I certainly like to ask the Guam Airport Authority if they can currently raise the rent of all their tenants that are essentially leasing out the same square footage, because that is a substantial amount of rent. Customs and Quarantine also has facilities at the Port Authority of Guam, and they pay absolutely zero to the Port Authority of Guam for being housed at the port. It's the very same circumstance. At the airport, they're checking passengers, and at the port, they're checking cargo. I share the speaker's concern with regards to this, because again, as I've mentioned time and time again, this is an area that's directly impacted as a result of this pandemic. And I do agree. We're taking precious financial resources coming out of the general fund that we don't know where that general fund is going to be a year from now. We don't know where that general fund is going to be 6 months from now. Especially if we don't have a continuation of the federal funds at the level we've been receiving we're going to feel some substantial impacts. And then what's our recourse? I mean, we know the governor has $600+ million literally in the bank. We know she's already used some of those funds to pay for other obligations. We know she's giving Guam Power Authority $15 million. So I don't know why we're not recognizing in these critical areas here that have been directly impacted by the pandemic, why the administration doesn't fund this. We should force the issue. I mean, I didn't hear anything from the head of customs at all whatsoever about this rate increase on their lease. Did you, Mr. Chairman? I sat through that whole hearing. I didn't hear this at all. And I think for us to be expected at this late hour to, oh, no problem, we'll just give you another $700,000. I mean, I really want to know, is this what the airport is doing during this time of this pandemic? Are they equally raising all the rent of their tenants by that amount? Because that's substantial. That is a substantial increase, and I would not support this amendment if it's intended to fund that without those questions being asked and answered. Again, there's nothing to stop us at any time coming back into session to address or amend any appropriation or language in law as we need to, because this is a big concern. I think this is the first I'm hearing of it. And again, these are areas the governor can, with her ARP funding, fund and justify. But colleagues, for us to just keep tripping over ourselves to say, oh, we've got to take the money out of the general fund that's been so adversely impacted to cover all these additional costs, I think we're not being responsible and we're not recognizing where we're at. Let's have the administration. Why would we give the governor all this latitude to not have to worry about funding these critical areas that have been impacted by the pandemic? Why would we do that? It makes no sense. And then the areas where we do have authority to appropriate, we're limiting our ability to do that, and we're limiting our ability to come back on other critical areas and assist, particularly because we essentially are not putting the money aside in the rainy day fund, which I think we're going to need. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I have tremendous reservations about voting on this amendment and providing these additional funds without those significant questions being answered. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this amendment.
Yes, Senator Brown, as a matter of fact, during that hearing, I did ask that question. Why are you paying rent, and why haven't you moved out and taken that money and paid a lot less than at the airport? But we never got an answer. Senator Moylan.
Mr. Chair, just a brief recess, lost some time.
Quick recess, you're with Customs. Okay, we're in recess at this time. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Moylan, you have the floor if you can provide the information that's needed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I refer to OFB for his conversation with ASO at Customs, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
OFB has the information now? Okay, here we go.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to clarify, when I said earlier about the rent increasing by 700,000, that's incorrect. The rent stays the same. The annual rent cost is 2.8 for custom and quarantine. Now, going back, in FY20, custom and quarantine was budgeted $2.5 million, $2,519,444, and they spent $2.6,097,647 in rent. In FY21, they budget for rent $1,640,077, and to date, they have not paid anything. It is the understanding of the airport right now is that they were given a deferment which was supposed to have ended in July. And they're just trying to figure out now what the total cost and payment for rent would be for FY21. But they do have an appropriation of $1.6 million available to them should they choose and want to pay whatever the cost of rent is. In FY22, we budgeted $1,132,233, and if you take that and you subtract it from the $2.8 million, which is the rent cost, they have a shortfall of $1,667,767. So basically what's happening is that over the years, they have not been budgeting the total costs for rent with the exception of FY20. I believe in FY21, because of the tracking of the custom and quarantine, and in FY22, it's causing them to, I believe, budget whatever they can budget within the ceiling given to them.
I am hoping that answered the question. Did that make clarification of the issues that we were asking about the funding? I think, Madam Speaker, you were asking that. Did that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I had asked, and so the answer was totally different, and so I talked about some other thing. So if you're going to give me the floor again, yeah. All I'm saying is we gave Customs, or you guys, OFB, gave Customs an increase of $800,000 in their budget right now before we add on this amendment. And the $800,000 is supposed to cover some of these things, and of course at their discretion because it's lump sum. So whether they cover rent or they cover what they're covering now, or they cover their hazardous pay, that's all at their discretion. And so I'm just saying, when I had asked why they had given...
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, point of order? State your
I thought
point.
you allotted 5 minutes for everyone, and
Yes.
I
No,
thought...
because of the question she asked, I just wanted to make sure that the response Senator Moylan got and Steve was to respond to that answer. That's all. That's to clear the air. on
Okay,
that one.
so is the speaker rising for a point of information or something?
No, I'm
Because I
just
thought she
restating my
spoke.
points because the
That's
information
out
I
of
was
order
given
then,
by
Mr. Chair, in
OFB was
accordance with your
completely
rules, and I know
different,
that
and we spent 5
we've been
minutes
trying-
on
There's always a
information
stickler in
completely
this room
different.
for in
Stand by,
accordance
ladies.
with rules.
All I did was allow that the answers provided by Senate, that was achieved or obtained by Senator Moylan to OAB was to settle the question about the $700,000 that was stated by OAB that is wrong. Am I correct? It was wrong, and that Senator and that Mr. Guerrero gave the answer that he obtained from Customs. That's all. It was just to clear that. Everything else, no. It's just to clear that and just to make sure that's fulfilled. Not to keep talking about the same thing over again, okay? That's all that
Yes,
was for.
although it's very convenient when we spend our 5 minutes talking about wrong information, it gets corrected, and then we can't speak again, Mr. Chair.
No, well, it's just, it's corrected now. And that answer that, okay? Now I'm going to ask, does anybody else want to speak on the amendment? Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, so what is the rental amount for customs?
What
What
is
is the
the,
total rental?
what is their rent amount? Steve,
Yeah.
I don't know if you know that answer. What is their rent for the year?
The annual cost for rent for the airport is approximately 2.8 million a year.
Okay.
Okay, 2.8.
Okay, so it's obvious they have not been, well, whatever is appropriated in FY2021, it's up to them how, it's to their discretion, right, and how they pay the rent, right? I mean,
Correct.
we didn't put any limitations or told them how much that they have to pay their rent for it. It's just like, I think in 2021, didn't we give them a lump sum and they decided how to pay for it?
Yes,
Okay, so it was up to them. We gave them a lump sum, whether they wanted to pay it out. Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chair, this amendment itself was increased about $3.8 million, increased exactly 3,819,518 into their budget. That's what we're looking at, right? Line 1 through 14, page 83, the amendment that we're addressing right now? So,
That's correct.
okay.
It's, when you have to
So,
break it, you have to
yeah,
break it
okay.
down first, okay?
So
Break
as,
it down.
as I'm looking at it, and of course, you know, because we get these amendments before what it really, it's meant to pay for, I just wanted to know if the 3 million is set aside for hazardous pay, and then the 155 for, 192 for uniforms, these are amendments that are coming up. What is what is left over from that? From the 3.8, well, I could do that math myself, stand by. Yeah.
So you're
192.
addressing that to the author of the amendment, all right?
No, OFB, just trying to
To
calculate.
OFB? Okay.
Yeah, there's two amendments that are coming up, one for uniforms, one for hazardous pay. What is the leftover from that? Because it's been increased 3.819518, so it's just a matter of subtraction. Let me just do it myself too. Okay. 19. Minus 3,155,192. Do you come up, Steve, with 664,326?
Senator, is your question is what would be the balance after you take out all the proposed
Those-
amendments, the
Yeah,
two?
well, which is two I'm seeing so far, only the hazardous pay and the uniforms.
Okay, give me a second and I'll figure
Sure,
it out.
thank you, Steve.
Steve, the question was referred to OFB, so you would have to answer that.
Okay, Senator Cello, if you're asking me what is, I don't quite understand
Okay.
your question.
Let me repeat it for you, Steve. The increase, based on this amendment, it looks like there's been an increase from the general fund from 10 million to 13 million plus, and then it looks from the special fund, Customs and Quarantine Special Fund, that was increased to about 700,000, right? So you add those two up, right, on the increase, how much was increased. Then you go to the amendments that are coming after this to spend this money. What is the difference left over? Because I only see two amendments. Are we only seeing two amendments here? Or do you guys see more than that?
Senator Tello, we are working on one amendment. I know
I'm
you
just trying to
see,
figure out the numbers here, Mr. Chair, because the numbers are coming out.
No.
660.
no, I understand what you're asking for, Senator Tello, but that's why the author of the amendment wanted to speak, because...
She can go ahead and speak on it and let me
Okay.
know the numbers, that's fine.
Okay, so we'll allow the author to speak on her amendment, because if you talk, you can't talk about the other two yet. We haven't got to there, even though it does
Okay,
lead to
The
it.
intention, yeah.
But
the
at least
intention.
she can at least speak to her amendment.
On what's the intention
What's
of
the
this extra?
intention? I
Okay,
think
thank
that's
you,
what
Mr.
you wanted
Chair.
to
Then
hear.
I'll ask the question.
Okay.
To the.
All right, okay,
author. Go
so
ahead.
will the author of the amendment yield to that question?
Can you please restate the question, Mr. Chair, and what is the origin?
The question, if I'm correct, was to, is to know what the intent of the increase. You got a 3 million and you got a 700,000. And I know that my colleagues here understand the 700,000 came from chapter 1 with the
Yes.
increase, and all you did was move it here.
That's correct.
But it's to hear the intent of all these increase of your amendment, not the other two, just this amendment, because it'll lead to the other amendments anyway, but we'll hear it then when we move to that amendment.
Right.
Okay, so we'll start with this one
um,
first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A portion of the money, just like DRT, is going to some overtime, the reimbursement of cadet training costs, the detail appointment pay, Typhoon Wutip back pay. Typhoon Wutip was like 4 years ago or something. And their uniform allowance of 2020. So the officers had to pay out of pocket for whatever uniform they had to use. And I understand that they also had to pay out of pocket for PPE, which I don't understand why our agency employees are paying out of pocket for PPE. And if you move forward into the miscellaneous provisions, that Customs and Quarantine since 2017 has been trying to work with Department of Administration to ensure that they get their hazard pay. And so their hazard pay is going to be $596,000 to ensure that they get their hazard pay. And so that's where the portion of the money is going to. And then also to ensure that they get their back pay, which is 2.979 as of June of this year. So we rounded it up, $30,000 more dollars. No, $21,000 more dollars, just to ensure that the government doesn't have this outstanding liability. That's all.
Okay, Senator Tello, did that answer your questions?
Yes, it did. I didn't see the third amendment, which was in provisions. I was still on the same chapter, looking for those amendments, so that's why it made it difficult. So now that leftover balance of $596,000 will be covering hazardous pay for FY2022.
That's correct. So we wanted
But,
to...
Mr. Chair, if I recall, Steve said that he had already appropriated in the budget for Customs and Quarantine, hazardous pay has already been incorporated in the budget. And can you answer to that, please, Mr. Chair?
Okay, that's,
Steve?
well, I'm gonna ask her to
Yeah.
answer part of that, and then I'll have Steve
Yeah,
validate
because he's the one
it.
that said that earlier, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Senator Nelson, could you please make the statement, and then Steve,
Yes.
Mr. Guerrero will make the validation of what exists, what was appropriate in the budget
Sure, that's not a problem.
with your numbers, so that we can match them all together. What is the total amount for hazardous pay that's being appropriate? Because I see where
Yeah,
you're coming
and
from.
that's what he was
amount-
telling us earlier, that it's already
Yes.
incorporated in the budget. Thank you,
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Nelson, please, if you could answer that question.
Sure, the actual amount is, let me just pull up the information.
For 2022.
Yes, thank you for your patience. Is 5905300. That's the anticipated 10% hazardous pay for 2022.
For 2022.
That's correct. And what is owed is, what is owed is, oh, it's in this bill, or this letter. CQA wrote a letter dated August 11th, and the 10% hazardous pay owed from 2017 in the letter says roughly 2.9000. But we had an updated information where it was 2.979.
Okay, you're stating that 2.979 is due from 27 up to today, this year.
2017,
Okay.
June.
Okay, and you mentioned that 599,380 is what is anticipated for 2022, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now we're gonna get,
And if I'm wrong in my calculation and it is appropriated in the budget, then I'm open for the
the removal.
cost to be amended. That's not a
Okay.
problem for me.
All right, so let's get Mr. Guerrero first, because the 2979 is for 2017 up to today, kind of like, okay, the end of the year, or September. But I think the issue here would be the hazardous pay that Senator Teller brought up was that Steve mentioned that hazardous pay is already built in the budget of approximately, Steve, if you can state exactly what's built in the budget?
You're correct. For custom and quarantine for FY22, we did budget hazardous pay within their appropriation that is being presented in the bill. The amount that we budgeted is roughly about 620, just slightly off, 20, 30,000
620?
from
Okay.
what you mentioned earlier, Senator Nelson.
All right, so that means the 599 that you anticipated for 2022 is already budget, so
Chair, can I get a
Maybe
short
the minute.
recess? Just a short recess.
short-
please.
a
Thank
short
you.
recess,
Because
okay?
of that, yeah.
thank you. Committee of the Whole is back in order.
Thank you.
Senator Tello, you still have the floor, please.
Thank you,
State your
Mr.
amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment, please. And you can find it on the Google Drive. I believe it's TTT L1-14, page 83R. And this amendment, Mr. Chair, is just to take from the general fund, only from the general fund, and instead of 13,373,901, take it down to $12,709,575, leaving the end result, the total amount, to be $15,448,048. And Mr. Chair, what this amendment will do is lower the amount from the general fund of this appropriation. And the intent for this is to revert this funding to, one, the soil conservation for 67 million, and the remaining, 67, yeah, I wish. No, it is late, sorry. $67,000. Sorry about that. $67,000. And the remaining balance, Mr. Chair, will go to Department of Revenue and Taxation, which the amendments will be proffered by some of my colleagues later in miscellaneous provisions, or appropriations, miscellaneous appropriations.
All right, thank you. Does anyone want to speak about the amendment? Senator Nelson, please. To the amendment.
Mr. Chair, I support this amendment. I believe that it's going to the right areas, and I also believe that we work together to ensure that everyone is taken care of. So I support this amendment.
Thank you very much. Senator Blas, you'd like to speak to this amendment, to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Does anyone else like to speak to the amendment? There being none, are there any objection to the amendment? Or you don't need to close. Any objection to this amendment? None? Amendment passes. Does anybody like to speak to the amendment as amended? There being none, are there any objection to the amendment as amended? There being none, motion passes. Thank you, my colleagues. Now, Senator Nelson, you have 2 more amendments, or 3. Please, if you would continue on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This next amendment is on line 9, page 83. Line 9, page 83. And so, colleagues, since the, there's two line 9, page 83, I think, in the drive. So the one that says Committee of the Whole, COTW. So colleagues, we've been talking about this. We've had numerous hearings on the hazardous duty pay for customs. And just to give you a little background on it, since 2017, Public Law 33-195 has been enacted. And for the past 4 years now, since I've been in this office, in this duty, many of us have tried to work with DOA and Customs and Quarantine so that they can get what is owed to them. There are some challenges and stipulations that Customs and Quarantine ran into. I mean, even in the first term, they worked with DOA for 6 months, and there was still some challenges to fix the coding in the system. And so the CQA already has the timesheets. They have all their documentation. The only challenge is the wording in the law. And so what is owed to them is $3 million for hazardous back pay. And I'm making this amendment. I've spoken with legal if they believe that this was the right route to go to ensure that they received what is due to them, what they've worked so hard for. And so I humbly ask your support.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak to this amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment? There being none, amendment passes. Senator Nelson, your next amendment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This next amendment is on line 17, page 83. And this was the breakdown that we were discussing earlier. So on August 11, 2021, we received a bunch of lists of what was due to the customs and quarantine. And because of the limited amount of appropriation of monies that we have, I picked out what I felt that is owed best back pay to the, gosh, it's late. Anyways, so it's uniform allowance for fiscal year 2020. That was during the pandemic, so these guys had to pay out of pocket. The Typhoon Wutip back pay, that was several years ago. The detail appointment pay, the reimbursement of cadet training costs, and the overtime to cover officer shortfalls at the ports of entry. And so I humbly ask your support. All of this totaled in accordance with their letter. I put in the amounts, and all of it totaled to $155,192.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Does anyone want to speak on this amendment? Madam Speaker?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that for this and the previous amendment for retroactive back pay for hazardous duty pay, and then these list items that came from the Department of Customs and Quarantine, that none of these were included in the governor's budget request, is that right? These are all additional since the budget request was submitted?
Is that for the proffer of the amendment? Because I can answer
For the
that.
OFB.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Guerrero, if you can please comment to that.
Yeah, my question was whether these were included in the governor's original budget request. As we discussed earlier with some of the other agencies, we made a big distinction between the governor's budget request and requests that the agencies actually wanted, such as increased positions at the Historic Preservation Office. So I'm just clarifying for the record that these are all requests submitted not in the governor's budget, but by the agency themselves. Is that right?
That is correct, Speaker.
Yes, thank you.
Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Senator Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the conversations that we're having, and just to go along the lines of the speaker, and I applaud the author for being able to bring this to light here. It's just been my observation in a couple of these things that from some of the agencies that after the budgets have been submitted and they came back and they talked to us, it's no surprise that it wasn't in the original submission. It really isn't no surprise that they didn't bring it out publicly in the public hearing. But I want to applaud, in this case, the members of Customs and Quarantine and in other cases, other agencies, that, despite in some cases maybe not even being told not to say anything about this, that they saw what was best for their agencies. And I applaud them for that. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to them. Okay. And again, thank you to the author of the amendment for being able to hear this, and for this body for being able to take care of those areas that should have been brought up, but were probably told not to, but they saw it was best for their employees. So I just want to take that opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Are there any objection to this amendment? There being none, amendment passes. Senator Nelson, you have only one more left. Continuing appropriation, please.
Yes, that's, let me find it. It's line 9, page 83, continuing appropriation. This is similar to all the provisions we've done, notwithstanding any other provision of law. The unexpended balance of funds appropriated to the Guam Customs and Quarantine and Public Law 35-99 shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Does anyone would like to speak to this on the continuing appropriation? There being none, any objection to this amendment? There being none, motion passes. Senator Teresa Lai, you have the floor, and you have two amendments for continuing appropriation for the different agencies, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One is for, on page 84, it's continuing appropriation for the Department of Chamorro Affairs. That would be that amendment, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
And yes, and to allow legal to make corrections.
continue, okay. Does anyone like to speak to this amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment for continuing appropriation for Chamorro Affairs? There being none, motion passes. Madam Speaker, you have another continuing appropriation for Comisión Ipino Chamorro.
Again,
Por favor.
the page 94, it's, but there's one prior to mine on page 90 by the other Senator Terlai.
Please stand by and we're gonna find it. That
The
was
older
page,
and wiser Senator Terlahi.
page 90? You have one for page 90? Okay, yes.
All right.
Madam Speaker, you still have the floor. I
Thank
think
you. Yes, so the motion to add a continuing appropriation language for the Comisión Ipino Chamorro, page 94, line 16.
Does anyone like to speak to this motion? I see no hands. Is there any objection to this motion? There being none, motion passes. Senator Shelton, could you read my amendment? That's, it's for the Ethics Committee. It's L4, page 98.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is Amendment SB 55JSSA L4P98 to line 4, page 98, to add a new subsection, to add a number 2 to subsection 2 of section 1, chapter 5 of the bill to read. Continuing appropriation authorization, notwithstanding any other provision of law, unexpended balance of funds appropriated from the general fund to the Guam Ethics Commission for fiscal year 2021 shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Are there anyone that would like to speak to this continuing appropriation amendment? There being none, any objection? I see none. Motion passes. My colleagues, we have completed Chapter 5. We are now on Chapter 6. We had a bookmark for Chapter 6, but I see no amendment. Do we need to move? There are no more amendments? I think that was Senator Brown, ma'am. On the legislature branch, do you have an amendment? Or we're trying to find it. We're on Chapter 6 right now, ma'am. Page 99.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm proposing this amendment to reduce the legislative budget to last year's appropriation levels, and primarily, Mr. Chair, because I had a concern with the fact that, essentially, coming in, it appears that the legislature, at least for a couple $100,000, overexpended its budget by simply not covering for the lump sum of its employees that were hired during the previous term. And I just don't think it shows responsible accounting here at the Guam Legislature. And I think to put ourselves in a position of appropriating for the rest of the government agencies, determining what we are funding, what we're not funding, I think we should be setting the example here. When we hire our employees, that decision should have been made to ensure that, be it in central or respective legislative offices, you have to anticipate you're going to have a lump sum that's going to be accrued at the end of the fiscal year. And certainly, as we know, the legislature ends its term every 2 years. There's nothing new or unique about that process, and certainly coming in a bit concerned about that. And so I'm proposing this amendment, as I mentioned, Mr. Chair, to reduce the legislative budget back to what level of appropriation it had in 2021.
Is there anyone that would like to comment to that amendment? Speak on that amendment? Senator Paris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. I think that we need to set an example as a body. I think, as we know, the economic horizon is not so promising, considering our prime industry is hasn't recovered. In fact, there isn't any signs that it'll be recovering anytime soon. And I think we need to lay the groundwork for more fiscal restraint. And I think, considering that, we are able to live within our budget, I think last year, or we can maybe perhaps make it more so that we are living within our budget. I think, I think we need to set the example.
Understood. Just want to make sure that our colleagues understand that all the expenses, because we didn't receive any CARES money, no federal money, so all the expenses that the central body incurred was taken out of budget, and whatever needs to be set has to be set. But that's just a statement. So, Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, can you explain the increase? Why? I know that there was some payback to a building we took from the Guam Legislature building or something like that. There was a fund that had to be utilized to pay out the lump sums. That wasn't anticipated in the last legislature and I guess last year. So I just want a full explanation as to why there was this increase.
I'd ask, we take a 1-minute recess. I can get my staff and I'll pass that over to the Legislative Secretary to just read out the impact, why the increase. All right? Recess, very short recess. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Tello, you wanted me to explain basically how the budget was, how they got to this amount. I provided everyone a copy of what the breakdown is and how it went up this much. And you'll find that if we go back on the first sheet or the front sheet, in 2018, the legislature was cut because of the Tax Job Act, 10%. And if you see there, we went from 8,496,000, we went down to 7,647,000. OEB cut was 47,000 and so forth. And as you move up, we maintain, we went down $1,000, well, $1,000 in 2019 only, or 3,000, and then in 2020, we were restored by 5%. What we were doing was basically catching up to what we lost in the Tax Job Act. And as you see, as we were growing, we took another cut in FY21 this year. We took a cut of from 462 to 439 total cost. Okay, which is correction, not 439, 7,618,000. That's operating 7,632,000. Okay, we took a cut of 5%. And you look on the back side, what we have to be considerate of is that in FY21, the retirement contribution employer share, it was in 21, this year is 26.97. It's now moved up to 28.32. The legislature operation in 21, FY21 was 667,892. In FY22, we asked for a 33,000 increase to 701,000. OFB moved up $2,000. Right? Lump sum payout. On the 34th, the legislature operation paid out 276. In the 35th, the total payout was 402,731. We anticipate that in the 36th it'll be 483. And if you note on the note, 34th was paid by Central Labs Fund. Whatever funds we have is what it was taken out of. On the 35th, paid by also Central Labs Fund. And then 2 committee budgets, the 35th, they zeroed it out by 200,000. The employer contribution for medical in FY21, it was 306. It is now at 350. Variation of 43,000. OFB went up by 1,858. Office lease on the 35th was 336. It is now at 348,000. That's why the increase. So this kind of breaks it down. And in addition to that, you'll find that with the many cuts that have happened, I remember you mentioned it previously, the minority and everyone else took a cut in their office budget. The total amount would be approximately $20,000 more for each senator's office. Basically trying to restore so that every senator can do what they need to do, catch up to where we were before. Because we're never going to catch up to the way it was. It used to be like $10, $12 million a year. Now we're down to only 8, or what is the amount on the? It's 8,114,000. It's really not much of a catch up. It's a slow increment going up. And keep in mind, whatever goes on during this pandemic, we foot the bill in Central and in your office. You foot the bill out of your own office expense. All right, Senator, I hope that answers it, brings clarity to why the increase. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can give a point of information to help
Please.
To expand on some of your points, Mr. Chair. As the acting chairperson of the Committee on Rules, I'm sharing some of the information from our, our financial officer here. As you mentioned, the government employee insurance rates increased as a result of statutory action that increases personnel costs to each office and central office, even though our warm body count remains the same for individual offices and central alike. The retirement contribution rate has also increased, and this means each office and central face personnel costs that are higher with no change in bodies. Lump sums are a statutory mandate for all staff, but are specifically appropriated by tradition and not a part of personnel costs when office and committee budgets are allocated. Thus, as the cost accrues annually, we asked for the appropriation of half this amount over each fiscal year. And then, as a body, we have unanticipated costs like counsel for declaratory judgment, our AV upgrades for the session hall and the public hearing room due to sound quality that we want to cover from the central operations funds. We have other unanticipated costs like maintenance. As you know, we've had to postpone some sessions in the morning because our HVAC unit has gone down quite a few times, and maintenance for this building, for that HVAC system, is quite expensive. We also have unanticipated costs, other legal counsel fees. This afternoon, we introduced a resolution from the Committee on Rules to fund outside legal counsel for ongoing ethics committee. And so these are things that we have to consider when we're looking at the legislature's budget. We did not see an increase in our budget over the last 2 years. And these are expenses that are catching up with us and that we need to plan for in the next fiscal year. So I bring those points up for consideration.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Tuttle, I hope that I've pretty much cleared the air. So, does anyone want to speak to the amendment introduced by Senator Brown, please?
It's on the information that's been provided, especially with regards to the lump sum. The idea that a separate appropriation is done to address lump sum, why is that? I mean, why isn't that incorporated into the budgets of both central and individual offices? Because that's news to me, doing separate appropriations just to address lump sums at the end of the fiscal year, which we anticipate every other year when the legislative term ends, because that's a substantial amount of money.
Maybe the acting committee on rules could answer that. 1 minute? Okay, you're going to contact. Oh. All right, Senator Brown, I'm gonna make an effort to answer a little bit, and Senator Shelton will finish it off. In the previous year's budget, unfortunately, the Appropriation Committee never saw what they needed. This year, I stated, I need to see it, I need to know what we're spending, and where is it being spent, and why we need what we are asking for. That's why we're able to get this printout. Senator Shelton will be able to maybe respond to the issue of the lump sum, of why it's being appropriated now. I mean, it's being identified as being appropriate. All right, Senator Shelton, if you can make a serious effort.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll try my best. I know that in the 35th term, your office came in as the new Office of Finance and Budget, and so we didn't know what was happening traditionally before you, but when we came to the budget in the 35th, things were really tight, and we made the tough decision not to budget for lump sums, and we knew that we'd have to cut costs, and we squeezed every penny to pay out lump sums in the end, using our lapses and whatever cost-cutting measures we could. This budget season with the Office of Finance and Budget, we've been able to include in this budget what we anticipate will be about half of the lump sums. And that's because we can't account for how much each person is owed. Every senatorial staffer has a different salary here in the legislature. The Committee on Rules does not manage each individual senatorial office or committee and how much they pay to each of their staffers. So it's very hard to determine what the end cost of lump sums will be at the end of the term. But we are anticipating that this budget, it will cover about half of what we will have to cover.
I hope that kind of answers that, Senator Brown.
Well, again, it just does bring to light, Mr. Chair, because those are things, in my view, that should be addressed when employees are hired. I mean, it's always an estimate. Everything we're doing here in this whole budgeting process is we're estimating with the hope that, you know, the numbers are going to fall where it is. It just, if the administration, and granted, their playing field is a lot bigger and broader than ours here at the legislature. There's a lot more area that they can adjust to accommodate. But, you know, to hear from your budget office that the administration is getting no increase, but the legislature is getting a 6% increase, and the judiciary is getting an 11% increase, you know, it does beg the question as to why this is not something that's incorporated. I understand tightening. We went, in the time of your dad, from a $20 million plus legislature to barely $7 million when I left 15 years ago. So we know what crunching and cutting and sacrificing and doing without is like. And I just think we just have to have a greater sense of responsibility. I mean, if we're only funding now only half, then what is the expectation? We're going to go back again at the end of next year and want another appropriation for the legislature to address the remainder? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to do that in terms of how we finance. And if the previous term or the term beyond was not providing this information, I mean, this is public information. This shouldn't be hidden from anyone, least of all the members of the legislature or the public, in terms of how our finances are being addressed. So I just think there has to be a greater sense of responsibility. We simply cut and sacrifice, because that is the standard. What is happening here right now, adding on, appropriating, is not the standard. And in time, it's going to come back to haunt us, especially if the federal funds decrease and our economy does not get back on track. And we recognize with what has happened, and look at where we are now. I mean, it's even more unpredictable. Just today, going to lunch, some of these smaller restaurants that we normally would patron are closed, just because of what's happened in the governor's executive order, just in the last few days. So what is the impact there? And then the one restaurant we went into and had to show our card, our vaccination card, less than half of what you would normally see in terms of people patroning that particular restaurant. So we've got some challenging times ahead of us. And I just think in order to sit on our high horse, so to speak, in budgeting for the rest of the government of Guam, we should be setting our own example and living within our means. And things like lump sum definitely should be incorporated into that and into the legislative budget so that we're not going back to the trough requesting additional public money for what we should have already been addressing at the very beginning. The other question I have is looking at the office lease, and at least in my experience, office leases are pretty standard in terms of what's been given out. For example, minority senators, the $2,000 limit has been there for many, 20, 30 years. So why do we have an increase of another $12,000 with regards to office lease, especially now that we have the main, legislative building? We're not, I'm not aware that we're paying any lease or we owe anything back. We pretty much, when the building was refurbished, I'm assuming, do we have any additional payment that we make for any of the refurbishment or the use or return back to our original building? I'm assuming that's not the case, but you might need to enlighten me.
I think my understanding is that not everybody can fit here, and that's why. Senator Shelton, maybe you can answer that.
Mr. Chair, that's correct. Not everyone can fit in the building as much as we wish that we could house every senator's office here and committee office here. It's just not the case. We have space in the building for the Speaker's office, and traditionally, leadership of the legislature is housed upstairs, and so we have a few offices upstairs, but other senators are occupying space throughout our community and renting out spaces, and that is the reason why. And now with, especially with social distancing, we're trying to, in the building at least, trying to keep our staff spaced out and follow all the safety protocols.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, Mr. Chair, why would there be an additional $12,000 increase unless what is the standard rental for a majority senator with a committee?
I think it's $3,000 a month.
So that would be standard $3,000, and again, these are old figures. This has been in place for many years.
Yes.
And then $2,000 for minority senators. So why would we have from one fiscal year a change of an additional $12,000?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Like I said, we're trying to accommodate all of the employees who are within the building and follow social distancing protocols. So we formerly housed in the 35th, 3 senators upstairs. Now we have only my office and Vice Speaker Tina Rose Munoz Barnes, as well as the Committee on Rules staff upstairs. And so the Committee on Rules staff used to share the space with the other senator as well. So one senator is not housed in the building when we are now occupying that space for more space for Committee on Rules and other staffers.
And also the Office of Finance and Budget used to be in the little office in here, that we moved them out because there was hardly any room to even meet. That's one additional.
So where did the increase come from? Where's the additional $12,000 going to then? Whose office, where did this increase come from? Because again, we can calculate the $3,000 for majority, we can calculate the $2,000 for minority senators. So where did this increase come from?
I know that $3,000 came from OFB. I know that, $3,000, and then I think 2 senators' office that were upstairs. Also, that makes it 9. So I'm not too sure where the other 3 came from.
We formerly housed 3 senators upstairs, and now there's only 2. So that means there's one senator who is one additional senator this term occupying space outside of the building. So we're paying that additional rent.
And OFB.
And the Office of Finance and Budget, who was formerly in the tiny office back here, they now have an additional space with your committee that's being paid
Yes.
for.
So the main legislative building then is housing one less senator than it did in the previous term.
Is that, there's only one?
That's correct, and it is, we are housing one less upstairs, but we are using that space for the Committee on Rules staff and staff of other office. Yes, Speaker also has some staff who are upstairs, as well as the Committee on Rules.
Yes, because I know that the Speaker's office is very small for any staff. But
Yes, for her staff and her
trying to
committee.
answer the question.
No, I appreciate the information. I mean, there was a time the legislative offices were far smaller than they are now. Again, I'm just bringing this up, Mr. Chair, because I just think we need to show a certain degree of responsibility in how we execute our own operations. If we expect the rest of our government agencies, then time will come. Right now, we're adding. I hate to see the day when we're sitting here having to subtract and where we're going to subtract and where those priorities are going to be, because it's a painful process. And that, for me, used to be the standard. So I'm used to it. I'll adjust if I need to. But it's not going to be a comfortable position to be in. And I think that if we want to show an example and set the leadership, I think we need to be responsible in how we spend our budget and how we appropriate our budget, because the fact we do have the authority to do that. We get to decide that.
Yes.
And I think we should carry that responsibility very carefully.
Right, and just for a little information, we spoke to the administration, and they understood the 6% and 11%, and they said they're not against it because they understand what we're all facing, to include the third branch. But I'm just letting you know that they have no objection.
You won't
to it.
ask me whether my concern as to whether they approve of it or not is irrelevant.
Right, all right,
Right.
okay, thank you.
Thank you as well.
All right, does anyone else want like to speak to this amendment? Senator Nelson? I apologize, I noticed that.
Just a point of order, Mr.
Yes.
Chair. The clock was not running, and it was way over 5
All right,
minutes.
yes, I understand. Does anyone else like to speak to the amendment? There being none, is there an objection to this amendment to reduce the amendment proposed by Senator Brown? We have one objection. Okay, all in favor of the amendment by Senator Brown, please raise your hand. Motion fails. We move along now. Please be reminded, Chapter 5 is closed. Chapter 6 is now closed. We're now in Legal Services, Chapter 7. I think, Senator Shelton, you have an amendment there? Give me a minute, and I'm going to obtain all the amendments so we can, all right? Senator Shelton, you have two SB 55 ALS L7 to 13, page 102.
Yes, thank you very much,
Ma'am?
Mr. Chair. These are companion amendments again. This is for the Public Defender Service Corporation. The first amendment is on line 7 through 13, page 102, to increase the appropriation from the general fund for the public defender from $6,110,159 to $6,520,159. This is an increase of $410,000 from the general fund. And this additional appropriation will be in the second amendment to fund additional costs of the Elder Justice Center. And if you'll allow me, Mr. Chair, I'll speak on both amendments. As you know, a few months ago, we passed a law to authorize the Elder Justice Center within the Public Defender Service Corporation. And at that time, we knew that we had a funding source through the Department of Public Health and Social Services, Division of Senior Citizens, a grant for elder justice. And that grant is about $192,000. And we knew that that would fund one attorney and a paralegal within the Public Defender Service Corporation. Since this Elder Justice Center has opened and has been going out, doing outreach, has opened its phone lines and publicized that they are here and available to do very simple legal work for our Manumku, the demand has increased dramatically. And really, the Elder Justice Center is asking for an additional $580,000, but we know that we don't have that much to give. And so I know that $410,000 is better than nothing. We can't fulfill their entire request, but we can give them something to continue helping our Manamkon expand their services. And if you'll allow me, Mr. Chair, to read into the record their letter to us asking for these additional funds. It says, please find and close the proposed budget for the Elder Justice Center for FY 2022. The total proposed operational budget is $7,072,214. After applying the applicable federal grant of $192,144, the supplemental local funding needed to successfully operate the EJC is $580,070. We are pleased that you support the partnership between the Public Defender Service Corporation and the EJC to administer much-needed civil legal services to our seniors. In 3 months, the EJC's client list increased from 252 individuals to nearly 500 clients in need of legal services. Clearly, this list alone substantiates the fact that our senior citizens are in desperate need of legal advice relative to managing and distributing their personal assets to their family members. The demand for our services greatly outweighs our current capacity, which is limited by the $192,000 federal grant available. We therefore make this appeal to our legislature to share the cost of providing legal services to our aging seniors. We envision establishing legal clinics at our existing senior centers to make our services even more accessible. The supplemental local funding can help us accomplish our goals. We appreciate your continued support of the EJC and your recognition of the benefits of partnering with the PDSC and the Division of Senior Citizens at the Department of Public Health and Social Services to fulfill the need to provide civil legal assistance to our seniors. Signed, Attorney Stephen Hattori, Executive Director of the Public Defender Service Corporation, Kathy Gogui, Administrative Director of PDSC, and Attorney Kat Seguenza, Managing Attorney of the Elder Justice Center. So, Mr. Chair, I ask my colleagues for their support of this amendment, first to raise the appropriation to the PDSC for the purpose of the Elder Justice Center.
All right, thank you. Does anyone like to speak to that amendment? Senator Nelson?
Mr. Chair, I rise in support of this amendment. It is important that we support our Manamko. We want to protect them from whatever dangers they've given. They sacrificed so much of their life to raise us, and this is the least that we can do for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Are there any objection? You want to speak, Madam Speaker?
Yes, there was no budget hearing for the public defender, and I haven't seen that letter. I'd like to get a copy of it, but I just want to talk a little bit about adding $400,000 for an Elder Justice Center. When we considered the law, I don't know if it was last year or a couple years ago, to establish an Elder Justice Center, what they were doing was departing from years and years of Department of Public Health gets a grant. They get federal grants for senior citizens for different categories. One of them is for legal services. And at that time, they were not providing legal services. I think it went beyond a year, maybe even beyond 2 years, because they kept trying to get it to be put at the Public Defender's Office. And the Public Defender's Office at that time said, if we put it there instead of contracting it out, instead of putting out an RFP like they always did, that they would be able to accommodate more clients, and they would do it at a cost saving to the government of Guam. And what actually happened in the end, when we went to the opening of the Elder Justice Center is that it was established at the Department of Public Health and Social Services and not at the Public Defender Service Corporation at all, contrary to representations that were made. And what's just surprising to me is that the legal services contract that they were supposed to help, or to get, they wanted to get the legal services contract from public health so that their budget would be increased by $192,000. I mean, they would get the contract and, be paid for the services, yet we're now, I don't know, we're going to fund it now like double, going from $192,000 or $200,000 of federal contracts to provide legal services to paying $400,000 on top of what we're currently paying. That's on top of it. So on top of the $200,000 contract and on top of the local match that we're already making at public health. So I guess I'm confused, Mr. Chair, and I don't know if this was run through your budget, because when I showed Public Defender their budget prior to this session, they said they were satisfied if they could get the continuing appropriation. So I'd like, we don't have public health here or Public Defender to tell us what happened. How did we go from, we're going to get a federal legal services contract that they RFP every year, and they get private attorneys to provide this service, and that we were going to give it to Public Defender so that we could get more services, and kill two birds with one stone. More services, we're going to supplement it with the Public Defender services and cost savings to the government. And now we're doubling it in 1 year. I don't think we've even operated that center for 1 year yet. And we're doubling it. The doubling. So it seems like something is wrong if we're not able to live within the grant. It's not clear from the letter. I guess I'd like to take a recess to see the letter, Mr. Chair.
Yes, we'll take a quick recess. Thank you. Committee of the Whole, call back to order. Madam Speaker, you got 49 seconds.
Yes,
and then-
I object, Mr. Chair, to increasing a program by $580,000 without a hearing. It went from a $192,000
Just a
federal
point of
grant
information,
to
Mr. Chair, a point
a
of information.
$772,000
A
program.
Standby, got a point of information. Freeze
Mr.
the
Chair,
clock.
a point of information. The amendment is for $410,000. It does not help them to reach the full $580,000 supplemental budget that they are asking for. It is a $410,000 appropriation from the general fund, to be
Okay.
clear on the amendment.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, please continue.
Yes, I confirm with the Director of Public Health, this is a public health contract. It's public health who's paying the $30,000 match to get the 192 legal services, I think Title IX grant or one of those grants. They've been doing this every year. The bill that we passed was to allow public defender to be the lawyers to service this, and they thought it was going to be at a cost savings. No way was it going to be at a $500,000 increase to our general fund budget, Mr. Chair. So I highly
Okay.
object, and I think this should have a
All right.
public hearing if we're going to do something like that.
All right.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chair, just a point of information. When the EJC first opened its doors, it had 252 individuals who were signed up on a waiting list already for services through the Department of Public Health and Social Services, Division of Senior Citizens. In the few short months since May, it has grown to nearly 500 clients in need of legal services. And this is a program that is already authorized. Today, we're talking about an increase to an appropriation. I don't know why we're asking for an additional hearing. That's what we do in the budget process. We increase, we decrease.
Objection, Mr. Chair.
That is our job here in the budget. And so we have almost 300 seniors waiting for legal services. We have the opportunity here to help them.
A point of information, Mr. Chair, they have the obligation to help them, no matter how many there are under this contract. And that was one of the promises that was made, is that the prior service provider, a private attorney, they complained. He wasn't fast enough, wasn't handling enough. And public defender promised they would be able to cover all of the seniors that needed their services.
Okay,
So a
Under
point
the
of
current
information,
contract.
point of information, Mr. Chair, if I may.
please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So yes, that was the thought in the beginning, that a $192,000 grant would be enough to service all of our Manamco. And we thought that was great. That was a great amount of money. We were very thankful for that. And things evolved rather quickly. People heard of the Elder Justice Center, and more people signed up for services at the Elder Justice Center. And so now we have a waiting list of 500 people. And yes, they must do their duty to help these people. They are obliged to help them, but we need to give them the resources to meet the need. An additional 300
Mr. Chair, this is a
an
debate,
additional
not a
300
point of
Standby.
information.
Madam Speaker.
seniors have
Madam
signed
Speaker,
up.
let's let one at a time with point of information, because you're both competing for the same
And-
almost opposite reasons. So please
Thank you, Mr.
complete,
Chair.
complete,
Originally-
Senator Shelton.
Thank you.
And then I'll
Originally,
come
it
back to you,
wasn't.
Speaker. I'll come back to you for more point of information.
Originally, it was envisioned that the Public Defender Service Corporation, that all of their attorneys would be able to help with the Elder Justice Center. They all wanted to pitch in. However, because of some concerns with conflicts, they had to hardwall the Elder Justice Center based on several court rulings to address the issue of conflicts arising. So they are limited to the amount of attorneys they can have, and they need to hire attorneys specific to this cause. So when they came to us saying they could do with just the $192,000 to hire the one attorney, the one paralegal, they thought everyone would be able to pitch in as well. But that just wasn't the case. And now we have this greater need, almost 300 seniors waiting for services. We have this money available in the general fund. that we can appropriate here at this time.
Thank you. Now, to get the last point of information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It remains unclear how the Elderly Justice Center was set up at the Department of Public Health and Social Services. They are the ones managing the contract. They are the ones doing the matching funds. And now, out of the blue, I'm not sure what this means. There's so many questions, Mr. Chair, that we cannot answer here in this, 5 minutes, that we're going to move it now to the Public Defender's Office and increase our cost from $30,000 to $700,000, government's cost. Maybe the public health would prefer to rebid it out if that's the case. I mean, there's so many questions, Mr. Chair, unable to answer.
Point of information,
It's not the
Mr.
type
Chair.
of thing that's supposed to be done in a
Understood.
budget.
Understood, Madam Speaker. Do you have another point of
A
information?
point of information, Mr. Chair. It was said that we're raising the government's cost by $700,000, and that is not accurate. We have a cost sharing that's paid out of the Division of Senior Citizens for $30,000 so that we can receive this federal grant. And this additional appropriation proposed right now from the general fund is $400,000. Not an additional $700,000, but $400,000, which I think is a very, very, very small price to pay to help our
Mr. Chair,
Manamco.
this is not a point of
Understood.
information anymore. Come on.
Where we at?
This is not a point of information. This is a debate, and
Yes, understood, understood. I think they're both trying to make a point. The amendment was already posed. It's obvious there's an objection. So, do you want to speak on this one now?
yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Thank
Okay,
you.
there you
In
go. Then
fact-
we'll start with you.
Okay,
Please,
Mr.
no
Chair,
debate, no
actually, I would
point of
like to
information.
yield my 5 minutes to the speaker. I'd like to yield my 5 minutes to the speaker.
Okay.
Thank you,
You want to
Mr. Chair.
yield to her?
Thank you.
All right, Madam Speaker, you got 5 minutes. No one else can yield any more minutes to you. You got 5. Please begin.
I will wait for the other speakers, Mr. Chair. Wait for if there's any other speaker.
No, she yielded to you. There's nobody else put their hands up. She raised her hand for to give to you, ma'am. Please, your 5 minutes is taken already. You're at 4:53.
All right, we already increased, OFB, increased the public defender's budget by $182,526. This amount was not in their request. The amount in the letter, why I keep saying $772,000, is because that's what's in their letter. That's what they're proposing to establish without any public law, without any authority, without any public hearing. We're going to incur a liability of $772,000. And we're going to take, I don't know, all of public health's efforts. They had a grand opening. We've been there. It's there at public health. And I'm just, it's really mind-blowing. And I think if they're not able to service the seniors, we should hear why. What is the issue? What happened to their plan of how they were supposed to service all the seniors? Because that's the same contract that is used across the nation, Mr. Chair. All the other states use this type of a contract for senior legal services. It's the same type of contract that they use for senior, I think it's lunches or other services. And they've always been able to do it within the grant. And I just think to incur a liability on behalf of the government of Guam without having any questions answered is way beyond this budget process and improper, really. It's like it doesn't give the people any kind of input. It doesn't give us any type of ability to find out what is the new plan. And it's really, if it's needed, then fine. It should be able to stand on its own and let's have a hearing on it. But just to try to sneak it in, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Why we're going to create something overnight that's going to cost us $700,000 that's supposed to cost us $30,000. And if there's a problem with in fact, I was just talking to the Director of Public Defender, and he said all they really needed was a secretary over at Public Health, assistance in intake. That's it. So I would suggest that the $400,000 goes back to where it came from, and that's from the tax refunds account, Mr. Chair. Back to that general fund tax refunds, where it could be used. $400,000 can pay 400 individuals with $1,000 refunds. And I think we could put that there until all these questions can be answered, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I just have a very simple question. You mentioned that the director told you from Public Defender? They only need a secretary? Is that what you're saying?
It's not even them. They just said Public Health might need additional intake people.
No, Madam Speaker, I'm just asking a question to what you said. Who said they only need a secretary? I'm just curious, because I'm looking at the letter.
This is my first time to see this letter, Mr. Chair.
No.
That's another thing. Here we are getting this
No,
at the
Madam
last
Speaker,
minute.
I'm just asking
Never
a
seen it.
question to your
And
statement.
it was not part, yeah.
I'm not referring to the letter. Who told you they only need a secretary? I just wanted to know that.
In my past discussions, that is what was discussed. And it wasn't something that was needed at the Public Defender's office.
Okay, I just
So
wanted to know that.
that's why I'm saying
just
they
want-
said they were asked to submit a letter here. So
Okay.
I guess we're seeing this letter. But
Yes.
still, Mr. Chair, I'm asking you. They didn't even ask you for this. They didn't ask OFB. It's worth a hearing, Mr. Chair.
No, I understand your claim. I'll work with that. I just wanted to hear where you got that. Does anyone else are you done, Madam Speaker?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else like to speak on this amendment? Senator Clint.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm trying to understand, is the debate here over whether or not to give money to government attorneys to handle this as opposed to private attorneys to handle this? If we don't give it to the government attorneys, does it then get outsourced to private attorneys to do this? I guess that question would be that question's for the sponsor of the amendment.
Senator Sheldon, do you yield to the question?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. So currently, the grant, the $192,000, does go to the Public Defender Service Corporation. They're able to help as many people as they can help. We have many gracious private attorneys in the community who also offer pro bono services to our Manamco, and we're very grateful for that. But when our Manamco don't have the services of the Elder Justice Center, they're waiting in a long, long wait line, the only choice they have is a private attorney. And so we don't want to turn any Manamco away. We don't want to tell our Sainas that we can't help you today. Please go find a private attorney that they probably can't afford. You know that many of our Manamco are on fixed incomes, living on very, very small pensions, unable to pay for any other cost than what is budgeted for. And when they want to sort out their affairs in their golden years of life.
Mr. Chair, this is not it's a debate again.
I'm
you know,
answering a
please.
question,
Point
Mr.
of
Chair.
order. Point of order.
My
This is
colleagues-
a response to a question I proffered
Yeah,
to the
like-
sponsor.
That's all.
Which attorney?
Madam Speaker, stand by. Senator Tello, the clock is ticking. Allow the author of the amendment who was asked the question to answer it. All of you just chill out, relax. Let them speak because I'll allow you all to speak also. Senator Shelton, please complete your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, many of our Manamco are on fixed incomes, living on very small pensions within a budget that there is no flexibility for a lawyer. And so we have the Elder Justice Center, which just opened. We know that they're doing great work trying to help everyone in the community. They also make referrals to private attorneys when they have a client that comes to them with a request that is beyond their scope of work. And so there are private attorneys that are needed. There are private attorneys that give pro bono work. But at the end of the day, our Manamco can't wait forever. They're going to have to go out to these private attorneys that they probably can't afford. And so
right.
we don't want to make them wait.
Okay, so the answer to the question was,
Yes, I got the answer to the
you
question.
got the answer.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So with the answer to that question, I'd like to say I rise in support of the amendment. I think it's a good idea to support our Manumku and ensure that they have this ability to be able to get some legal help from our government. So I rise in full support of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment?
Point of information, Mr.
All
Chair.
right, please state your
Yes.
point of information.
According to Public Health, the contract is with Public Health. It's not with Public Defender. Public Defender, they somehow hire or utilize a lawyer from Public Defender, but the contract is with Public Health. They kept the contract themselves. They do the matching. So yes, it's always been the government providing this service under the federal grant. It's a federal grant. It's
Okay.
recognized all over that. Federal recognized that we need to provide services for Manumco, yes.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Does that, stand by first. Does that mean that that public health has that, and that means public defenders shouldn't be providing this service other than what they're getting paid for by the grant? Is that what you're stating? I just need a clear answer, because
I
that's
think
really
so.
what I'm hearing.
not sure. I think this
not sure.
proposal in
Okay.
front of us is a whole new proposal, and it's not the current contract with Public Health.
Okay. So
Point of
that could be-
information, Mr. Chair.
One more point of information, please. Keep it short. Thank you.
This is not a whole new proposal coming from the Public Defender Service Corporation. The Public Defender Service Corporation and the Department of Public Health and Social Services Division of Senior Citizens has a memorandum of understanding, and so they are sharing in this work. The Public Defender Service Corporation provides the attorney, and with this additional funding, they will be able to provide more attorneys, more services to our Manumco
Okay.
in partnership with the Division of Senior Citizens and this grant.
All right. Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? We got 4 more minutes. Yes, Senator Duenas.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman. So, yeah, I'm following along because I'm reading the letter as written on August 12th, 2021 from the Elder Justice Center, signed by the managing attorney, Elder Justice Center, the administrative director, Public Service Corporation, the executive director of Public Defender Service Corporation, and essentially what they include here is the proposed budget for the Elder Justice Center that we know is already established, and the federal grant of the $192,000, and saying in order to successfully operate the EJC is an additional $580,000. They enumerate here that the list of 252 individuals has risen to 500 clients. Included in here as an attachment is essentially a budget summary proposal, which, in my view, basically is a small agency. Now, I'm not saying this is not needed, because I don't know. All I know is that the letter makes the proposal, which appears to be a great departure from the bill that I was attended the public hearing for in order to operate this office. Included in this, of course, is the very typical budget summary with all the requisite attorneys, project coordinator, social worker, secretaries, legal clerks, contractual obligations, equipment, supplies. Personnel breakdowns. So I don't know, like I said, I don't want to say that it's not needed, but I do share some of the concerns in terms of a letter on August 21st versus, you know, the budgetary process and having to oversee this. So I'm just going to remain open-minded, but I do share the concerns. Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. My colleagues, it's 10 o'clock. We're going to have to end. We won't be able to vote because we reached our magic time.
Mr. Chair, notwithstanding the House rules, I ask that we continue on to finish this amendment.
Mr. Chair, if I may, a
Do
point
we
of
have-
information, this is not a House rule, it's actually it's law, I think, right?
No, it's house rules. It's the house rule. It's standing rules. Does, it said notwithstanding the house rules. There's a motion to extend it so we can finish this amendment. Are there any objection to that? There's one objection. All in favor of extending the house rules, notwithstanding the house rules, so we can vote on this one amendment and then end it? Please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, then motion passes. Do you have anything else? You had 1 more minute and 21 seconds, Senator Duenas?
Yes, Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman. And yes, so I do rise to concern. And the only concern is simply because I can concur with what's contained in the letter. But like I said, it seems like a large departure from what the original intent of the grant was. And I'm not clear on now the contractual arrangement that established this as public health, and now what looks like a reworking and an MOU to bring forward being able to handle the capacity. I mean, if that demand exists, you know, and I'm not countering that it doesn't, but I have a hard time absorbing basically what is the equivalent of a small agency now being established. I mean, we have agencies that are 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 as standalone agencies. So I remain concerned, but I'll listen to the balance of the debate.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak on this amendment? I see no hands. Is there an objection to this? Do you want to close? Or Senator Torres, please?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to rise in support. I remember when this Elders Justice Center was stood up, and we are very fortunate that it is so successful that the need has expanded to where it is, and that the right people are in place to address that need. And this is really a question of contracts, which is, as was brought up by one of the things, if it isn't, the service isn't provided by the government, who is it provided by? Is this a private attorneys versus the government services? So where there is a need in this time of pandemic where our elderly are really struggling, let's give them the resources without haste. And that's all I want to rise in support of. This Elder Justice Center is in fact standing up, and people are responding, so let's also respond and give them the help they need right now. Thank you. So I rise in full support.
Thank you, Senators. Anyone else that hasn't spoken yet? No one else. And there's an objection? Senator Blas, please.
Yeah. Just for that, I'm gonna start the clock. Mr. Chair, okay, we got this letter from Public Defender. Somebody please answer me, who does the Elder Justice Center, who does that program fall under?
Who's the oversight chair?
No, who does this, where, does this fall under Public Health or Public Defender?
Public defender?
Who's got the contract?
I can answer the question. Mr.
Public Health told me Public Health does.
Public Health.
It's public health, but
Point of
then
information,
assigned
Mr. Chair.
MOA. We've got, Senator Sheldon, please just state who's got it.
Yes, thank you very much. Public Health Division of Senior Citizens receives the grant funding, and they subgrant the funding out. They have an MOU with the Elder Justice Center at Public Defender Service Corporation. Public Defender Service Corporation, through a law that we passed in this body, authorized them to be able to utilize this grant and to be able to have this Elder Justice Center open. And so that is how they're operating now. It's through the Public Defender Service Corporation with funding out of Public Health Division of Senior Citizens as a subgrant.
All right, thank you. Senator Blas, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it does. And well, does this amendment, so this appropriation is going to public health?
That's a good question. The way I look at it is the appropriation asking to go to public defender.
Sir, how does we go to public defender when it's public health that is the administering authority?
I'll ask the sponsor to answer that, all right?
Mr. Chair,
Or the author.
the grant that is funding the Elder Justice Center at this time is administered through the Division of Senior Citizens. They subgrant the money to the Public Defender Service Corporation. We authorize through law to allow the Public Defender Service Corporation to be able to open and operate the Elder Justice Center. So yes, the Elder Justice Center receives funding from the Division of Senior Citizens federal grant, but this is a supplemental appropriation that we are discussing tonight. A local appropriation to continue the mission of the Elder Justice Center and expand the mission, not expand the mission, but expand the capacity to carry out the mission of the Elder Justice Center.
All right, thank you. Senator Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that, that response. However, I just caution the body, we may be taking some unprecedented steps here in being able to provide direct appropriation to a subgrantee.
I hope you understand.
I didn't, that wasn't a question, it was, that's a statement that I'm making.
That's a statement, yes.
Statement that I'm making is, I understand and I appreciate, and I know what its intent. It's just that we've got to be very careful in how we're going to be able to appropriate this because, again, in all my years of working on budgets and everything, we've got to be very careful as to who we're going to appropriate to, although recognizing that that appropriation is, in this case, going to a subgrant. But it has to go through the authority that is by statute the agency that runs the program. So I just caution on that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, a point of information.
Okay.
We are not appropriating money to a subgrant. We are appropriating money directly to the Public Defender Service Corporation with this amendment. And we authorize through Public Law 100-36 for the Public Defender Service Corporation to open the EJC, to operate the EJC. And so here we are with the opportunity in front of us to directly appropriate to the EJC. The EJC receives a grant from the Division of Senior Citizens. We are not appropriating to a sub-grant. They receive the sub-grant from the Division of Senior Citizens.
Okay.
And this is offering a supplemental appropriation from local funding.
Understood. Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? There being none, I know I heard an objection.
Just a
Yes.
point of information, I'm reading the bill when we passed the bill, and
Okay.
that, at that time, the governor, or, no, in the bill findings, it talks about how they were going to administer this with $190,000 federal grant to provide legal services. Public Health reports that there are over 400 Manamco currently waiting legal services this grant could provide. Finds that they were going to partner with the Public Defender, Guam Legal Services, Micronesian Legal Services, to provide services necessary for the Manamco. And so all it did at the time that the bill was passed was to authorize the Public Defender to enter into this type of service, because Public Defender is governed by law. And so it was to amend that law so that they could enter into an MOU with Public Health to provide this type of service.
All right. Thank you. Now back to the amendment. Is there anyone else that'd like to speak to the amendment? There being none, I think, if I'm correct, I heard an objection, right, Speaker? Objection to the amendment, correct? Do you have an objection to the amendment? We're going to move to vote, okay? And you can close. Now you can close. I just want to settle this. Go for it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's quite simple, I think. More people need more help. Therefore, more money is needed. Nothing prohibits the Elder Justice Center from receiving more funding, local appropriations. We mix federal grant money and local funding to supplement programs all the time. We've heard it over and over again, what our local match for a federal program is. Colleagues, Mr. Chair, caring for our Manamku is at the heart of our island's culture. Respetu. I'd like for all of us to think about that word, to think about our Manamku. The services that they need at this time. This amendment ensures that we continue to honor their legacy. We're able here today to make the Elder Justice Center a more sustainable place for our seniors to receive the services that they need. They waited long enough for us to establish the Elder Justice Center, and it's been amazing to see May, June, July, August, in these 4 months since they've opened, the need, the people who are signing up for these services. One of the beautiful things about our culture is that we take care of each other. And many of us have had the opportunity to care for our elders. But there are elders in our community who don't have anyone, who don't have children to help them navigate the day-to-day, who don't have children, a niece or a nephew, to take them to the bank, to take care of their legal services, their legal obligations. And so this Elder Justice Center has been a godsend to so many. That's what the Elder Justice Center attorneys have told us. This is making a real impact in our community. This is an amendment that will allow us to provide for our senior citizens, our most vulnerable, our manamku, in a time that we know abuse is on the rise. We've passed legislation in this body to protect our elders from abuse, financial abuse, physical abuse. And this is another tool in our toolbox to be able to support manamku in the best way that we can. So I think the question before us tonight is, are we going to continue to make these 500 indigent manamku wait for legal services they could not otherwise get? Or are we going to make the decision to help them? With that, Mr. Chair, I ask our colleagues for their support.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. My colleagues, can you check for Senator Bloss? My colleagues, this will be the last amendment. We won't go beyond this one page. The reason why, because the clock is already against us on, not just for our time, but for the system to be reset. My colleagues, we will move to vote. There's an objection. All in favor of this amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion fails. My colleagues, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 8:30 and we'll continue on.
Mr. Chair, before you gavel down, can I ask for a reconsideration of the motion?
You want a motion to reconsider? All right. Are there objections to that motion to reconsider? You have an objection? All in favor for the reconsideration, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Short. Motion fails. See you all tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning. We'll continue on. All right? We'll continue on page 102. Thank you. Please drive safe. Be safe. See you in the morning.